Hello and welcome to Game Titan. As I was trying to explain what the difference was between decimal and binary and hexadecimal in another video, I realized I wanted to be able to turn on and off the displays of these three bases, and wanted to make that change. So I had started out already by adding this handler when the D key is pressed inside the decimal sprite here, and set it to control this variable called showDecimal that will either be 1 or 0. And there's a trick to switching between 0, which is you just take 1 minus that variable. So when the D key is pressed, it switches this decimal variable between 1 and 0, and we'll use that to control whether or not the decimal parts of the program are showing. Down here in draw, I had started to add this if statement. So if this showDecimal variable that we just added is 1, then we will show, and if it's 0, then we'll hide. So I can just add that somewhere around here, maybe before we actually position it, maybe even earlier would actually be better. Up here somewhere before we even do anything to the sprite at all. So now, as we hit D, we'll have to hit the flag. That is unfortunately changing the original, which I didn't want to do. Oops. I actually want to change the stamps. So what we would want to do is, if showDecimal is 1, then we'll do all of the stamping here, and then if it's 0, we won't do any stamping at all. Let's see if that works. That's much better. That is loud, so I'm going to mute this. And as we hit D, we can see turns this on and off. This is a global variable, showDecimal, so we can also use it to control this sprite here, which is actually very simple, doesn't have any code at all, so this should be fairly easy. This one, when I receive draw, then we'll use that if statement that I was about to do, where if the showDecimal variable is equal to 1, then in that case we will show, and otherwise we will hide. Now as I press D, both the label and the number go away or appear. There's one more place that we need to change, which is if we hide that and we press this, you have 1s flying towards this phantom invisible number. So in this code here, we need to find where it's heading toward the decimals. So here is where the down arrow is implemented, and you can see that there are ones coming out of nowhere now. So here we're calculating a length of the decimal number and creating one of these ones to fly out of it. So we'll need an if statement that says if this variable we're talking about earlier, if if show decimal is equal to 1, then we will do the decimal portions of this. Like so. Let me make this smaller. And then we can delete these blocks here. Now, it's no longer the case that there's one flying out of nowhere. But we also need to make the change in this other part of the code that sends the ones flying out. And we can get rid of these two blocks and put in this if statement instead. And hopefully that will do it. Now we can see that both when, let me full screen this, both when we hit the up arrow and when we hit the down arrow, there isn't an extra one flying around. At this point, all we should need to do is repeat the same thing 2 more times, one for the binary and one for the hexadecimal. So we'll add 2 more variables. Show binary and show hexadecimal. Create them for all sprites. They'll be globals. And we'll need similar if statements. Here. So we have this show decimal if statement, and we need to also have a show binary. Which will replace these 2 lines here. And then finally we also need a show hexadecimal. Which will replace these 2 lines here. In the decimal sprite, I had this when D key pressed, and we can make copies in the other 2 sprites, but for binary we can use B and change these variables to match. Similarly, in hexadecimal we could use H and change these variables. I can test that out by pressing the H key, and you can see this variable updates. and press the B, and you can see this one updates. So we don't need to show those anymore because that's working. But we do need to finish updating the -1 animation in here. I can actually show that the +1 animation is working. If I press H and B, they appear again, and if I press B only, then only the hexadecimal one shows, and if I press H again, then nothing shows. And the down arrow is still always showing. So that was up here, and we'll make copies of this again 2 times. And this one will be for hex, and this one will be for binary. And this goes in the hex, and this should be in here. And now we can remove these and remove these and stick this back in where those lines used to be. You can full screen this again to test, and you can see that neither of the buttons is sending out any 1s or 0s. And the last thing we need to do is turn these labels and these numbers off. Which is here? Yeah. We already did. Which is just set to 1, then we show it, and if it's side then we don't show it, so we can copy this into... Oh, that's frustrating. Things in the way. There, we can copy, and also into here the other label. And just change this to be the binary variable here, and the, oh, there's a random plus sign in here. And this one's the hex, I think. So be that. Let's see if this works. This is not working. Oh, it is working. But we didn't do this yet. That was, where was that? In here. There's one other thing. We did this. So we said that if these variables that we created are 1, then do nothing. We actually don't need that else. We could just replace it with this thing here. So we'll find the stamping in here. Is this a little bit more complicated? No, it's not. If this one's binary, so if show binary is equal to 1, do all this stuff. No, not do all that stuff. Do this stuff. As before, except we just have this if statement saying that if the number in this variable is 1, then we'll do all this stamping, and otherwise we'll not do anything to this and replace it with this if statement. And lastly, one more time in here, if this equal to 1, then do all this stuff. Alright, let's test that. Pressing H, not expect that. Alright, what happened there? This is at 90, 36, 90 minus 20. Calling this. Oh, there's some numbers here, so hopefully if we hit start and stop and start, it'll H, D, E. Turn off the binary. We have 2 animations now. Pins, decimal only, binary only, hex only. Right, other combinations, decimal and binary, binary and hex and decimal. That's good, and then all 3. But I think that right now this feature is not very discoverable, so temporarily we can put some instructions in here. Press up arrow, down arrow, slide, press D to toggle the decimal display, press B to toggle the binary display, press H to toggle the hex. Keep spelling that wrong. Display. But it would be nice to have some switches or something like that in here later on, so that people wouldn't need to read the instructions. Some switches that look like these buttons, or maybe when you hovered over it, so it was obvious you could click on it. If that did happen, what you would do is have that switch also just change this variable. And so in that way, it wouldn't actually be too hard to keep the D key shortcut, because both of them would just have to run this small piece of code, which isn't that much to copy back and forth between the 2 places. Let me just make sure that this is kind of what I wanted to. I can do an explanation where you have decimal on first, and then maybe reset it back to 0 first, and count in binary, and then show them at the same time, and then you can take hex up to 9 and ask a question, and then at the end show all 3 at the same time. So I wanted to do here. If you found this video useful, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell to turn on notifications, and press the thumbs up button. It really helps out. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.